first item on the agenda, are there any bill introductions this morning? Representative Carlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I have RS 223551.
And what is it in regards?
It's in regards to a 13th paycheck.
Okay. Committee, you've heard the bill introduction. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Helgerson. All those in favor of the bill introduction, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Bill is introduced. Any further bill introductions this morning? All right, seeing none. Committee, you should have received through email the minutes for the February 18th and the 21st meetings. Were there any changes to those minutes? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion. Representative Concanon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to approve the minutes.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion to approve the minutes for February 18th and 21st. Is there a second? Second by Representative Helgerson. All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Minutes are approved. Okay, we're going to resume the conversation that we had yesterday in regards to the profiles from the Office of Budget and then also the Research Department. So right now I would ask that Director Profit continue his discussion in regards to the profile that has been presented by the Office of Budget. Director Profit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, and good morning, committee. I appreciate the time again today. Sorry I wasn't able to get through it in 7 minutes yesterday. Trust me, I would have preferred that. Again, Adam Profit, Division of the Budget. Just want to take some time to walk through our profile that has the GBR as a starting point, as well as the Apex assumptions loaded in. And when I say Apex assumptions, Apex obviously is a bill. And then there is a deal, proposed deal on the table coming out of that. So we're really walking through a specific proposal for one particular firm. So just want to make sure we're clear about Apex versus the deal. Yesterday I walked through page 1, which was all of the assumptions, and that's where we ended. I'm happy to go back to that and review if anybody would like, or we can just jump right into the profile. So Mr. Chair, I'd leave it to you.
Just go ahead and jump right into the profile.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Okay, so on page 2 of what we handed out yesterday shows our profile. And again, the starting point was the governor's budget recommendation with everything fully loaded. If we start on the second column, which is fiscal 22, the year that we are in, the DOB rec, the first change that you'll see versus what you've seen previously is the first highlighted section, which shows the variance to the CRE forecast in year. What that is we've added the $237.3 million that we have beat year to date to the November revenue estimates. That is loaded in there as a one-time event. It does not impact the base of revenues by which we grow year over year. So I wanted to make sure that it's just a one-time $237 million, because so far that's all we beat by and that's all that we know. Don't want to compound it going forward. If you move down, one row below that is the axe the food tax. Obviously, with the governor's plan to start in fiscal 23, there is no impact in fiscal 22 on the revenue side. The row below that is the Apex revenue adjustment. So this is what we would see for Apex on the revenue side. Now remember, a reminder for the committee that there are revenue impacts and there are expenditure impacts. If there is a tax credit, that's actually a revenue event. So even though it's money going out the door, it's coming from the revenue side, so it's a revenue event. So we would assume $32.4 million coming out in fiscal 22. And we'll stop on that row and just kind of move across on that Apex revenue adjustments. The next year would be $98.5 million of revenue adjustments related to any potential deals out there. And then $174 million in fiscal 24, $182.8 fiscal 25, $183.5 in fiscal 26. We stopped at fiscal 26 because that was the length that the last profile went as well, just going out a number of years. It's worth noting that if the assumptions that are in here hold true, these are largely built on $1 billion of the $4 billion coming to fruition within fiscal 22. Therefore, the 5-year clock on that portion starts in fiscal 22. The flip side of that is starting in fiscal 27, some of these credits will begin to roll off. So the impact on the revenue side in fiscal 27 starts to diminish, and you'll get much closer to a zero number. 27 gets lower by 30-ish million, 28 gets lower by about another 60 to 90 million, 29 gets lower by another 30 to 60 million, and then you eventually hit zero on the investment tax credit. So it's not on here, but know that if you hit to fiscal 27, the revenue impact diminishes. So if you flip down to the expenditure side, we'll go back to fiscal 22. Again, we've kind of broken out base expenditures, human services caseloads, K-12, both the state finance or the school finance formula and then the K-12 capers. There is one additional quarter of enhanced FMAP in here of $65 million net benefit. When we did the November caseload estimates, the feds had the public health emergency ending at the end of calendar quarter 1. They have since extended that, and it's gone out to calendar quarter 2. That was not captured in caseloads. That's a $65 million benefit. So again, because that is a known dollar amount, we went ahead and put that in here. I will let the committee know that it appears likely, although it's not done yet, it appears likely that the feds will extend that one additional quarter into calendar quarter 3. We won't know that until early April, so until such time that that's official, we're not going to load anything into the profile. We have the governor's budget expenditures, governor's expenditure amendments at $1.29 billion. And then right above that, below that is the Apex expenditure adjustments, no adjustments in fiscal 22. And we follow that through fiscal 23, 24, 25, 26. It's about $6.3 million on the expenditure side that we show going out. And there are a lot of puts and takes in there. So some of the credits that are being offered as a part of Apex would be on the payroll side, right? So 7.5% of total payroll for a firm and 65% of withholding for any suppliers. So that's a credit that would go out the door. On the other side of that equation, that credit only goes out the door in connection with an employee actually working. So if an employee is working there, if there are 4,000 employees, those 4,000 employees are paying state income tax, which is money in the door. Now, the money out the door on the credit is larger than the money in the door on the withholding, but you have to account for 4,000 employees times $50,000 times an effective tax rate of 3.2% coming back in the door as one offset. I believe that was left off of the last profile. Just want to make sure that that was included in this profile so it wasn't a one-legged entry. So if we get down to the ending balance, and I'm showing two different ending balances here that I've highlighted. We've got the ending balance, which is what this committee and this legislature holds itself to, the 7.5% ending balance. And then we have the Budget Stabilization Fund, which has historically been zero or near zero. With the governor's budget recommendation, she's recommending putting in $600 million this year. Again, we have that carrying forward throughout fiscal 26 on this profile. As a reminder, by statute, if at the end of any fiscal year, our revenues, actual revenues exceed the April forecast, 50% of that gets deposited into the Budget Stabilization Fund. We're not assuming that we're going to beat any April revenues. We're just leaving the Budget Stabilization Fund at $600 million and going forward. So with all the puts and takes, the credits, everything else, if you slide out to fiscal 26, we have the ending balance, the checking account, if you will, at $213 million. Which is significantly improved from the negative 400 and whatever it was earlier. $600 million in the stabilization fund for total cash on hand of $813 million, or close to 9% of expenditures. So those are kind of the big things. As a reminder on some of the assumptions that we covered yesterday, in the governor's budget recommendation, we put in $120 million of SGF to pay cash for the docking, $65 million of SGF to pay cash for the lab, $20 million to pay cash for the KDM building, and just short of $20 million to pay cash for the Hayes Armory and acquire the land. For docking in the lab specifically, we are authorized to go out and find as many federal dollars as we can to offset the state cost. We've been told consistently by the Recovery Office, but that we are very confident that 50% of the cost of construction of both buildings will be an allowable use of federal funds. So we've encumbered $92.5 million of federal funds, but we have not yet released the SGF. So what that means is as soon as we release the SGF, all these ending balances go up by $92.5 million. So in fiscal 26, that 213 gets closer to $305 million. If we get any level of federal support for the KDM building and the Hayes Armory, those are $40 million in total. Say we get 50%, there's another $20 million of SGF that gets released. That ending balance all the way through goes up another $20 million. I just want to point that out to show that, again, trying to be as conservative as possible and not show any good news. We also didn't load in any ancillary benefits or new economic activity in the state. I said this yesterday, it was right at the end, but with 4,000 employees in the state, if you assume either they're all net new employees or if you assume even half are net new employees, we don't assume any hotel stays and revenues from that. We don't assume any food purchases. We don't assume any new home constructions, anything like that. So none of the positive economic activity is baked into this either. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to stop and answer whatever questions there might be, and I'm sure there are a few.
All right, thank you, Director Profit. Yeah, I think there's already a few questions. So I'm going to start with Representative Helgerson.
Thank you very much. Let me go to the topic you just left. When are we going to find out about the proposed new business?
Director Profit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very good question, Representative. That is, and I need to defer that to Department of Commerce. I'm not involved in the negotiations at all. That's really Department of Commerce that's leading that. I think they've said the mid to late March or early April timeframe.
Okay. Would you pass that along to administration? Because we've asked several times and I can't get a straight answer. So
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
I appreciate that. The governor just recently came out with a GBA, I think, of $50 million for additional housing. Is that in this?
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for reminding that, Representative. Yes, the $50 million, it's really $53 million. That's in the governor's expenditure adjustments. It's not a separate line item, but it is baked in there.
Did you include the $1 billion payment that the House is, or did you not include that? Because that'll have, for capers, because that'll have some different changes of payments and balances.
Director Profit.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good question, Representative. No, all of the expenditures, the starting point was the GBR. I don't believe that any of the capers bills or any of those other appropriation bills have made it all the way through to the governor's desk. Therefore, they're not in here.
Representative Helgerson.
One final question. As I understand, you and JG are the individuals that make the decision about what our fiscal profile is, from listening to the individuals from the various universities. You made a decision, consensus made a decision, that all of the additional, I think JG and I totaled it up, was $2.7 billion of additional revenue that's either projected or that's coming into the state, will have the financial ramifications. But the question in my mind is, how much of this is due to the direct federal input of money that we have seen, an unprecedented amount of money that's come into the state? And if we shift back to before COVID, what does that do to our projections in the future? I know it's going to shift state general fund, some of the state general fund. How much, or did you even talk about that?
Director Profit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative. So there are a couple of pieces to that answer. The easiest one to identify, and if I'm hearing your question correctly, how much of this money is one-time federal money is the essence of what you're asking. So I'm going to answer it that way, and please tell me when I'm done if I'm wrong. It's very easy to identify on the caseload side, right? There's a temporary increase of 6.2 percentage points in the FMAP tied to the public health emergency. We can pinpoint that and say exactly what that dollar amount is. I will say that we've accounted for that going away as we go forward. So the 6.2% going away is in this profile. I mean, we've accounted for the fact that we need to spend more SGF to get there. But there's a level of the current ending balance that is tied to the additional federal dollars that have come in by that. On the revenue side, I'm not aware, and JG can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe we ever came to a consensus of $1,356,412.13 is tied to the new federal dollars. Now, we've talked about how checkable deposits remain extraordinarily high and certainly much higher than we've seen in the past. And with a high level of checkable deposits, that can lead to stronger sales going forward. When do we see checkable deposits coming down? We're not real sure just yet. It's really hard to pin down a number. I will say that in fiscal 22, the current fiscal year that we're in, we are up 4.5 or 4.7% over fiscal 21 if you adjust 21 for the delayed tax payment. Fiscal 23, we have forecasted at 3.5 to 3.7 above. fiscal 22. The revenue projections we have in here for fiscal 24 and beyond are 1.8% year-over-year growth. So it's a recognition that we do think there's an impact of federal dollars. So it's going to slow down from the current levels of 3.5%, 4.5%, 5%, cut it in half down to 1.8%. So I believe we've accounted for it. I don't know that we can put a firm dollar amount on that, if that answers your question, sir.
Representative Helgerson.
Yes. You've built it into the assumptions you believe at a lower amount, whatever this bubble that we have from the federal government, you've already built it into your assumptions. You think, and totally I understand this is just a projection, but you think you've taken into effect what this might be, a realistic proposal.
If I may, Mr. Chair,
May.
one specific example I can give you that might help is on the corporate revenue side, corporate income tax. We average somewhere between $450 and $550 million every single year. You go back 20 years, corporate revenue, that's what comes in. In fiscal 21, we landed at $650 million, I think. So substantially higher, 25% higher than what we normally see. We brought our forecast down in fiscal 22 to $600 million, and in fiscal 23 stepped it down again to $550 million, in recognition that corporations are making an enormous amount of profit right now. In fiscal 22, where we're at right now, I'm afraid to give a number because I want to maintain the fidelity of the revenue estimating process, but if the numbers that we're seeing today carry through the end of this fiscal year, we're going to land at $850 million corporate income tax revenue. Again, next year we have it at $550 million. So we're accounting for it coming down at some point in time. Now, some of that is supply side economics, right? There's supply chain shortages. That means that there's less stock in the stores, so you can keep the prices higher. You don't have to go lower. There's a lot of that in there, but we've accounted for a lot of that. You're welcome.
Representative Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here and explaining this a little bit to us. Can you dig in a little bit more for me as to what is included in the governor's expenditure adjustments, the 1290 and the 833? I assume we have the governor's proposed refund, individual, just check back to people, 400 million. What else is included in that 1.2 and 833?
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
That's up here.
Representative, there's a lot in there. What I should have pointed out is if you go below all the highlights and everything, you can see one-time expenditures, $1.3 billion. So a lot of that is one-time expenditures. I'd be happy to share this. It was a page from the slide presentation that I reviewed with the joint committees. I'd be happy to go over that with you. But a few things would be the $600 million right into the budget stabilization fund. That's on the revenue side, though. The resident tax rebate, $460 million. Paying off Capers layering payment was $253 million. Paying off 2 of the bonds was $332 million. Pulling forward the delayed K-12 payment was $200 million. So there's just a lot of big ticket items in fiscal 22 that really get the budget set up to be more stable going forward. That's largely what they are.
And I remember that, and we'll refer back to that. Thank you for reminding me.
You're welcome.
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Profit, thank you for being here. We have north of 500 million from the FMAP decrease over the last year and a half, 2 years since this pandemic. And so that's going to end, arguably it was supposed to end the end of this month, and maybe it'll go now till June. But in 2023, that'll be at 65 million a quarter. That'll be $260 million. So have you reflected that in here?
Director Profit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative. Yes, that is absolutely reflected in here. When we do the consensus caseload estimates, the only amount of federal FMAP, the 6.2 percentage points that we load into a quarter, is the end of the quarter in which it's there. So everything going forward, fiscal 23 and beyond, we assume just a regular FMAP rate.
Well, and I see, Mr. Chairman, so that's reflected somewhat in the human services caseloads, but it's 170 million between 22 and 23, and then it's only 60, 70 million from 24 to 23 to 24, and then roughly another. Do you think that's accurate? The caseloads are going to go down that much to reflect that 260 million a year?
Director Profit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative. So what we have in here on the Human Services caseload, so again, the starting point being fiscal 23, this assumes 0 enhanced FMAP, just the base FMAP that we're all accustomed to. We were all accustomed to before COVID.
Right.
Everything beyond that is assuming a 3% growth rate in caseloads. As I mentioned yesterday, and it's on the assumption slide, the last couple of years, the growth rate in caseloads has been somewhere between 0% and 1%. So we're assuming a larger percent growth in caseloads moving forward than what we've been experiencing these last couple of years. It's 3%. I would also point out that enrollment in CanCare right now is extraordinarily high, tied to the 6.2 percentage point FMAP. So one of the conditions that the federal government put on states to accept that enhanced FMAP was to say, do not remove anybody from CanCare unless they ask to be withdrawn, right? So that means that our rolls have grown significantly over the past 2 years. As soon as the public health emergency ends and that 6.2 percentage point FMAP goes away, we start doing redeterminations of those folks that have stayed on, and the population that's on CanCare will start to come down. We've reflected some of that, but I think you could probably make a case that the fiscal 23 number, which is the starting point for fiscal 24 and beyond, is maybe overstated a bit.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Representative Wolfmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today, Director Profit. My question is on the Medicaid expansion. You have a deduct of 68.5. I want to make sure I know how you got to that number. So at the most conservative level, we would at least get 87 additional $1 million if we passed Medicaid expansion, and you took out the 68 million per half year, and you took out the 19 that it would cost us, and so that's how you got the negative 68. Is that correct?
Director Profit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative. Very good question. I probably should have spent more time on this. That's 100% how we got there. So going back to the legislative session of 2018, the fiscal note for Medicaid expansion has been in the ballpark of $37 to $42 million per year for an entire year of Medicaid expansion. Now that's net cost, right? It's $1 billion a year. You get 90/10 funding, and there's some offsets. The net SGF would be about $40 million a year going back to 2018. So for half a year, we loaded, assuming a 1/1/23 start date, we loaded $19 million of cost of SGF. To your point, as part of ARPA, the feds are extending a carrot to non-expansion states, by which if you expand Medicaid, you will immediately get a 5 percentage point increase in FMAP for 8 calendar quarters. And I believe their intent was really to make up for states that did not expand when it came out, because when you first expanded, you got 100% coverage by the feds, and then 97%, 93, 90%. But we get 8 calendar quarters of a 5% increase in FMAP on the base Medicaid population. The estimates for the benefit to Kansas, if we expand, range between $350 and $450 million over those 8 quarters. So we took the low end of the range, $350 million, divided that by 8 quarters, multiplied that by 2 to get 2 quarters, and that's $87.5 million of SGF that we don't spend if we expand. So the $87.5 federal dollars, less the $19 million cost, $68.5 million savings to the state if we expand Medicaid in 23.
So, in other words, it is costing us money not to expand Medicaid now with this federal incentive.
Director Profit.
Mr. Chair, yes, ma'am, you're 100% correct. By not expanding Medicaid, it is increasing the state cost by $68.5 million.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in 22, you added 237 million CRT forecast, which, I mean, we don't normally do with our profiles, where we don't normally, they won't meet until April. So, I mean, that's kind of different. But, and then you went ahead also and did a 3% increase in that year between 22 and 23. And then you lower it down to 1.8. Am I correct?
Director Profit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple of things. The 22, and I can get my book out, the 22, if you go above the 237.3 to the taxes line, you'll see 8.908 billion. That is the consensus revenue estimate that we estimated in November for fiscal 22. We also estimated fiscal '23 at that same time. So that's the consensus revenue estimate for fiscal '23. I don't believe I've adjusted that from the consensus revenue estimate.
I understand, but you also added in the 237.
Yep, so I'm stepping into each of the numbers here. So the fiscal '23 tax number of 9197, that is the revenue estimate from November '23. I did not add anything to that number. The 237 that I added in fiscal '22, 100% agree. Typically, we don't add the year-to-date beat because we don't know if we're going to bake that in or if it's going to change. We also actually generally don't go out 5, 6, 7 fiscal years and load these other assumptions. So you can look at this one of two ways. You can say we're going to hold to the revenue forecast that was out there from November and keep that in there. Or you can say we're going to add what we beat year to date and then just make assumptions going forward. If you hold to the numbers that we estimated in November and you don't account for the 237, in effect what you're saying is over the next 6 months, we are going to miss by $237 million the rest of the year because we really think that year is accurate. In my mind, this is one of the $237 million, that is one of the facts that we can put into here. Everything else is assumption-based once you get to the right of the spreadsheet. So I wanted to make sure we're accounting for facts on here.
Okay, well, we just don't normally do that. That's not how we do these. When it all comes down to it, though, it doesn't really matter how many assumptions. We're going from $2 billion to $213 million in less than, what, 4 years? I mean, we're spending almost the whole $2 billion down, even in your profile.
Is that a question?
Well, sort of not, but
Director
more
Prophet.
of a statement.
I heard him say it was a statement, so I'll leave it alone, sir.
Okay. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple questions. I'm just looking at the consensus revenue estimates from November 2021, and we just go to 23. So you're doing your own CRE for 24, 25, and 26. The blue numbers are your numbers, not a CRE.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, you may.
All right. Thank you, Representative. I would not say I'm doing my own CRE. I use the 1.8% growth rate for each of these. The reason I picked 1.8, candidly, I was just copying what was on the last profile because 1.8 was a growth rate that was assumed on the last profile that was shared with this committee. So I wanted to make sure that was at least consistent.
Okay, and so then my second question is coming back to the totals that were provided here in taxes. With inflation being in its all-time high since the 1980s in December, 7%, and with projections of 4% in 2024, my question is, what inflation rate did you use on the revenue side for taxes compared to, for example, K-12 that you used 3.3%?
Director Prophet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question, Representative. I'm going to get a little technical here and down into the weeds. So the inflation that we use on the K-12 side was 3.3%. We just use that. As you know, it's a rolling 3-year, the CPIU Midwest. So for the first couple of years, it likely won't be at that 3.3. The 7.5% will be one of the years. It'll be lower inflation for the others. If that inflation continues, that cost will continue to go up. So that's the cost side of it. On the revenue side, about 50% of the total taxes that come into the state are from individual income tax. Another roughly 30% are from sales taxes. That's 80% of the total revenues come into the state. What we have found through the consensus revenue estimating process, and the university economists have helped us with this, is that specifically on the individual income tax line, it is a one-to-one relationship of GSP, nominal GSP, to where we can land with individual income taxes. So I've done regression analysis going back to 2009. So if you exclude the tax experiment years, for lack of better terms, if you plot out what Kansas GSP was, you can determine exactly what individual income tax is going to be. Because it's using nominal GSP, inflation is baked into that. Meaning, if inflation is 7.5%, pardon me, and there's no GSP growth, then the nominal GSP is going to be 7.5%. We could expect the individual income tax to increase by 7.5%. We have only increased it 1.8% in here. So we're giving more weight to inflation on the cost side than we are on the revenue side in this profile. And again, it's just largely assumption-based.
Okay, well, I was looking at it and I thought that you were using the 7.5% on the revenue side and the 3.3 on the expenditure side. And you're saying that that is not the case.
I'm sorry, no, it is absolutely not the case. I believe I put that on the assumptions tab. Yeah, if you go to the assumptions page under revenues, which is the second large bulleted item, the bold, the very third thing says grow revenues by 1.8% in fiscal 24 and beyond.
All right, thank you.
Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the Medicaid expansion piece, how many people lose Obamacare between the 100 to 138?
Director Profit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I believe you're asking for the folks that are on the exchange right now that are making between 100% of FPL and 138% FPL, how many would be transitioned to CanCare or to Medicaid?
Yes.
The estimates that we ran in the past, and I haven't looked at this for a couple of years because I haven't been Medicaid director for a couple of years, we estimate 150,000 newly eligible Kansans for Medicaid expansion across the board. When there was a proposal to only expand up to 100% of FPL, we said it would probably be about 100,000 people would be eligible. Therefore, 50,000 people would be transitioning from the exchange over to CanCare. And that is a high-level assumption from a couple of years ago.
Okay, and then have you taken into account what the increased expense will be on CHIP? Because we're told that more children will get on because of Medicaid expansion. And they can't get on to the Medicaid expansion, they would be on CHIP.
Director Profit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Right now, what we have on the consensus caseload side is simply the consensus caseload estimates. As you just explained, the CHIP eligible folks would not be eligible for expansion, right? Because they're CHIP, they'd be in the CHIP program. It does come with a higher match rate than the base Medicaid population, substantially higher. To the extent that that work's been done, I don't think it's in here. It's just the caseload estimates that are in there right now. And I would also say that if they are eligible for CHIP today by expanding Medicaid, that does not alter their eligibility status.
Right.
So when we do a fiscal note, you're looking at what the change in law does to eligibility status and how many new people might be eligible to take care of a program and what percentage might. Given that expansion does not change the eligibility status for any CHIP children, it doesn't appear to be a trigger for a new wave of population that would now be eligible for CHIP.
Okay. Well, and I think that number is going to be important if it's as many children as they keep saying is going to be added to this, because we know that there's eligible children today that are not on the program because the parents have chosen not to do that. I think it's also important that people understand with Medicaid expansion on that 100 to 138 population that they will lose their Obamacare, they will go on a welfare program, and some of them don't want to do that. So there apparently is no assumptions for those that will become uninsured, because you don't get a choice. You can't stay on Obamacare if we expand Medicaid. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On your front page, you said you added 3.3% to the K-12 budget because of inflationary. Did you add inflation to any other expenses from your original draft?
Director Profit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative, for the question. We did not. Generally speaking, the way that we do these profiles is we take the base expenditures line. That's effectively everything that's not caseload related that was approved by Legislature, and we roll that forward by 1 year. That's the starting point for any agency to build their budget. If they need something above and beyond that, they have to submit an enhancement. So we roll the base budget forward, and then we add a growth assumption for human services caseload, which there is a growth assumption there at 5%. K-12, there is a growth assumption there at 3.3%. And then the Medicaid expansion on here, we have it a little bit lower than the 5%. I think it's at 3%, if I'm not mistaken.
Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, and so you were asked about the $1 billion into CAPERS. It hasn't passed yet. I mean, it's passed the House floor, and it'll probably pass the Senate. It'll probably happen. I don't know if the governor will sign it or not. But what did the governor have in her budget for paying down CAPERS at this point, before we did change it to $1 billion?
Director Profit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative. There was $253 million to pay off the CAPERS layering payment. And the CAPERS layering payment is a debt that is above and beyond the UAL. So we talk a lot about the UAL, and it's very important because that shows the health of the fund. The layering payment is debt above and beyond that. And the SGF payback is 100% SGF. So you put in 100% SGF, you get 100% SGF payback. Beyond that, there was no other extraordinary deposits in the CAPERS because by the end of fiscal 23, we'll be at the 80% mark at the current rate.
Proceed.
Yes, you may.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I just want to, Mr. Chairman, this kind of scares the heck out of me, this whole thing, because we've added 1.8% inflation to revenues. We didn't add any inflation for expenses other than schools and caseloads. And if you added the same 1.8%, you're looking at about $140 to $150 million additional a year, and that's without compounding it. That's $600 million. We added in this room, we added $150 or $200 million to social services budgets, and compounded over the next 4 years. That's 600 million or so. There's $750 more million that was spent on CAPERS possibly. So we're at what, another $2 billion. So if you take 2021, $2 billion surplus, and you run it out to, they're saying 213 million, and that number is not even close to being true. It's really a negative billion or so. We're doing something really wrong here.
Well, I agree with you. That's why we're having the discussion.
4
in
years,
regards
it's
to
$3 or $4 billion, sir.
But also you have to keep in mind, this is the governor's recommendation from her budget that she submitted to us in January. So there are adjustments that we are going to be making probably later on this morning because some of those items are still included in the budget that we're going to be discussing when we start having the discussion on House Bill 2588.
I agree with that, sir, but this is a very rosy outlook, and if this is what we're putting forward for constituents to see, we're lying to them. Thank you.
Director Profit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one point of clarification, and I'm sorry if I didn't say this clearly enough earlier. We do have inflation built into K-12 and to Medicaid. We're showing a 3.5% growth rate in K-12, so it is growing 3.3% every year on the K-12 side. And on the human services caseload side, we're growing that by 5%. So I just, and maybe I heard you wrong, but I want to make sure that we are showing a growth in those particular buckets, just not on the base expenditures.
Right, so you have $3 billion that we're not adding inflation to, and if it's just the simple 1.8%, that's still quite a bit of money, but it's really 6 or 7% inflation, and it's gas prices are soaring right now. Inflation is going to go up, and we're going to run out of money in a year or two. I mean, we can't afford all of this. We've got to make some adjustments, I guess, some pretty big ones.
And we'll be doing that later on. Representative Estes.
Thank you. Director, I want to be real clear on something. A lot of the recommended budget this year included one-time payment, one-time money for raises. When you guys, or they were considered one-time raises, but in our mind, that's an awfully hard thing to unwind. Do your expenditures include those expenses being paid for with the SGF in the future?
Director Profit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question, Representative. So there are two chunks of raises out there. The statewide 5% is absolutely in the base, so we show that into the base, and it carries forward SGF to the extent that agencies have SGF to cover that. Some do fee fund. On the 24/7 pay plan, I will need to go back and check. I don't want to answer wrong. I think we have it into the base, but I want to make sure about that because we might have put it on a one-time line. Let me go back and verify, please, and I can have that answer within the hour.
Thank you. I'd like to know that, and I'd like to know the grand total of the 24/7 pay plan because I'm not recalling that number. Thank you.
Yes, I can get that for you.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm kind of a linear thinker, so this always appeals to me, and I've been wrong so many times in the past. when I look at something like this. Have you done any modeling? You know, we've had a number of recessions in memory of Representative Helgerson, probably, and Representative Burrows, maybe not any of the rest of us. Have you done any modeling as far as the last couple of recessions, what the effect on revenues were? You know, I mean, these things are always great. Now, I've seen a number of them, and the numbers never, you know, come to fruition exactly. But what's the downside if we have a recession next year because of some of the things happening overseas and everything else?
Director Profit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question, Representative. Yes, there is, I can't say there's not risk of a recession. I can't say that. I'd be lying to you, right? The recessions that we've seen, if you go back over the past 40, 50 years, they appear to happen about every 10 years, right? You look at 1979 through 1982, there was a big recession there. The 80s were kind of a mess in general. You look at the 1999 into 2000, the dot-com bust, you know, you look at 2009, so about every 10 years. Had I run this out another 3 or 4 years, I'd probably get a lot more conservative on the 28, 29, 30, 31 numbers because that would be the timing of it. Now there's some geopolitics at play here, right? Obviously with what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, there's supply side economics with what's happening. So to answer your question more directly, we have not pulled this down. We can tinker with any of the growth assumptions or cost assumptions that we need to, and we're happy to do that. It's just, you know, that all the forecasting, all the economists are showing projections over the next couple of years, and we do get bands from the economists of, you know, headwinds and tailwinds and what that might look like. But all of the projections for the next couple of years as it relates specifically to GSP, which is one of the key drivers of one of our chief revenue streams, show that GSP is going to continue to grow.
And I am very risk adverse just by nature, but.
And I appreciate that.
Do you know by chance what the decrease in revenues was for what was the last big one we had? Was it 2008, the last big recession we had?
2009-ish, yeah, 2008. It started in 08 and carried through to 2010. I don't have the number in front of me. We have history back 25 years. I'd be happy to get that for you.
Or I could get it from research.
Thanks.
Okay. Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to ask a question about the Budget Stabilization Fund. Where is that up? Is it that transfers? I'm looking at fiscal year 2022. Is that where that is? Or maybe you could explain a little bit about that line that's transfers and where that 600 fits in here.
Director Profit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question, Representative. We have it broken out separately. I tried to condense this from my working document, which has just about everything, to something that fits on this piece of paper. It is in that transfers line. So any moves to the Budget Stabilization Fund is a revenue event, so it's on the revenue side, and it comes through as a transfer. We have a number of transfers across agencies, so we're transferring $600 million from the SGF to the Budget Stabilization Fund, and that's where that lies.
In the out years, what would some of the 226, 216, so on?
There's some, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
if I may. There are a lot of K-12 capital transfers that happen. I'd be happy to break that out for you and get you the information if you'd like. It's normal course of business. There's nothing hidden in here. It's just some events that happen and our expenditures are revenue events that show up as transfers, and some are expenditure events.
Okay, and just real quick, one last question. Thank you. So just when I look at the, you know, the total expenditures and then subtract the one-time and see just where it's growing, and of course, there's no one-time past 2023, but, you know, it's a growth $1 billion, over $1 billion in 2023, and then it goes back just a little bit in 2024, but it's growing. Is that just what our history is and what we can expect? And do we have any percentages? Is that normal, what's going on in those out years, or how about that? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Director Profit.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question, Representative. Short answer, yes, it is common practice for the expenditures to grow. Again, K-12 moving forward, now that we're at the constitutionally required level, the law states that we will adjust K-12 funding consistent with a 3-year rolling average of the CPIU Midwest. So expecting it to go up there would be growth on the K-12 side. We expect growth on the caseload, human services caseload side, so Medicaid. So yes, the base expenditures, again, we just, whatever's approved by the legislature, we roll that and we give an allocation to the agencies, and that's your starting point. If you want more money, you got to ask for it, you got to tell us why. Everything else, we do have growth assumptions in, and that's been practice for many, many years.
Thank you.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, over the years when I've looked at these budgets, when we have money is when we really have a difficult time trying to decide how we're going to spend our money. When we don't have any, most people will say, just keep me flat, don't cut me, you know, and we're able to go. At this point, I think we have money, and maybe for some, it's one-time money that you can do investments. But what I do know from my constituents anyway, when there's money, there are people out there that think, well, gee, things can get a little bit better for me now because they have money. When we didn't have money, they'd say, okay, it's okay, along those lines. So looking at this budget, I would say it's probably ambitious, but I don't think it is over the top. You know, it's the matter of how we do it. I mean, how do we do our own budgets at home, or how do we work with it? You know, you look at it and you take care of the important things that need to be taken care of right away. And you make sure that's covered. And then after that, you decide, can we afford to do this, or can we afford to do that or the other? No, we can't do it this time. We'll wait until next year. I think that's part of how that budget is. So I guess my question to you, not I guess, I know it's my question to you, is this budget able to be sustained over whatever period of time? Not that we know where we're going to get our money. Because right now, I think we're even asking, where is all of this money coming from? Because we're not sure we're supposed to be having it. It's federal dollars. Federal dollars is our dollars coming back to us that we can utilize. So mine would be the sustainability of it, because that's what I hear. We're going to run out, we're going to spend it, and now we have committed ourselves to this, and we have to maintain this through SGF throughout. So my thing is, when you put together this budget, was it in keeping in mind that it could be sustained versus any catastrophic kinds of things occurring?
Director Profit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for that, Representative. That is an absolutely critical discussion to have, and one that we have quite regularly in the budget office. And that's exactly how I do my budgets at home as well. And so, again, going back to some of the key tenets of how this was put together, trying to be conservative on the revenue growth side, you know, 1.8% in the out years versus the current 4.5%, 3.5% numbers that we're seeing now, aggressive on the cost side. Did not load any ancillary benefits or new economic activity result of any new firms that might come into the state. So not showing, you know, revenue from, I said cheeseburgers yesterday, just people buying food, people buying goods, people buying other things. If these firms and suppliers are buying products from local, from Kansas businesses, which they get a sales tax exemption for, those businesses are making more money, therefore paying more taxes. We're not reflecting any of that in here. The decisions that were made with the governor's budget recommendation were looked at through the lens of, is this sustainable, and how do we ensure that this is sustainable going forward? For example, paying off debt, using $330 million to pay off 2 bonds eliminates bond payments going forward, freeing up cash. Pay cash for the docking building and for the lab. Normal course of business would be to take out a bond and just bond it out and pay it for 30 years. By doing this, now we have assets on the state's books that we do not have payments associated with for debt service. A lot of other things like that. Straighten out the highway fund to make sure that we can get to critical infrastructure projects, because infrastructure projects are not only important for citizens, but they're important for economic development as well, right? They're key economic development tools. The money we put into moderate income housing, again, trying to set ourselves up for economic development. The money we put into higher education, ensuring that we have a well-trained workforce going forward, things of that nature. So that's a very long-winded answer of saying, yes, I believe that this is a sustainable budget. And that's, the governor and I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And my job as a budget director is to make sure that I can look the governor in the eye and look the chairman of the appropriations in the eye and say, yes, we can do this, or no, this is a bad idea. And I've had both of those conversations with both my boss and legislative leadership. I think that we can do this. Selfishly, I hope I'm in this job for at least another 4 years and 9 months. So I know that I'm going to be married to this budget profile, but for better or for worse going forward, and I'm going to have to answer to it. I want this to be a good story for Kansas and for my daughter and for those for years to come, and I think we can sustain this.
Thank you very much for your answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One last question for Director Profit, and then we're going to move on to JG with research. Representative Estes.
Director, do you know how many new positions were in the governor's budget recommendation?
New positions? I don't have that number with me, but I can get that again by the end of the day.
Thank you. And if you could include the salaries associated with it and the fringe benefit cost with those, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I will say that there was more, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, if I may, there was more of an emphasis on looking more at salaries and market adjustments, because there are a lot of agencies that have a lot of openings. So is it an FTE problem, or is it a salary problem? Do we fill the FTEs that we need and that we have now before we get out to new FTEs? So.
All right, thank you, Director Profit, for being here and giving us a breakdown of the profile from the Office of the Budget.
Thank you, Mr.
We'll go ahead and turn over to the other profile from the Kansas Legislative Research Department, and so I would invite JG Scott to come to the podium. JG?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You should have a profile. Looks like this, but yours doesn't have writing all over it. And it's on the yellow paper. This is the profile that we originally put together for the Apex bill with the governor's proposed Apex. So this has the 3-year distribution of the investment credit. It's to be instigated over the 5 years, so they have 5 years to spend, and it's based on the $4 billion for the firm. It also includes $2 billion worth of investments for the supplier. The firm payroll gets reimbursed at 10% of their total expenditures for 10 years, 4,000 jobs at $50,000 a year. Supplier has withholding. Excuse me, I'm on the wrong line. Yes, 65% of withholding for 10 years, the same assumptions, a total of 4,000 jobs at 50,000 salaries. And then there's training for each over 5 years in this proposal. The proposal that you see here does not include the $237 million that were up. This went with the consensus revenue. Was part of the reason we use these numbers is because we're up now doesn't mean we're going to continue to be up. Things are changing quickly in the world, so we're going with these straight consensus revenue estimates. We're doing that for both the revenue and the expenditures. It also doesn't include the adjustment for the $65 million that the director talked about for savings from the 6.2%. Once again, because we don't know what the rest of those caseloads are going to do, we usually keep that at those consensus numbers until we change those. The profile here goes from about $1 billion in 2022 to a negative 426 million in 26. Like I said, a portion of that is because this is over 3 years, and I think the director was talking about spreading that over 5 years. There's, like I said, there's no changes in the CRE estimates, and once again, these are KLRD estimates from 24 forward for all of these expenditures. The human services caseloads, we have projected at a higher level than what the director did, and the same for school finance. We originally thought we were estimating this a bit high, but now it may not be as high as we thought it may have been. We have that increasing about $134 million a year. To answer your question, Representative Francis, I did look quickly at receipts for 2007, which were about, state general fund receipts for 2007 was about 5.8 billion. 2008 dropped to 5.7. 2009 dropped to 5.6. 2010 dropped to 5.2, and then 2011 it jumped back up to about 5.9 billion. So as the director was talking about, when we talk about the GSP, the gross state product, if that's going up, those withholding taxes go up. If we do hit a recession, and there's not one projected in here, those receipts for would probably be dropping as well. So, but for this purpose, we did not project any type of a recession, and the revenue going out is approximately about a 1.8% increase going forward as well. So, the revenue was fairly consistent with what we would normally project. The expenditures, when we look at a profile, and just want to remind everybody, when we look at a profile, it's not a prediction of what we think is going to happen. This is a planning document so that when we look in those out years, if expenditures are going up and revenue isn't going up as much, it's something to be cautious about. You know, if those ending balances are continuing to increase, then, you know, you have less caution that you have to consider. So in this, which is pretty conservative because the estimates that we have for expenditures only include any adjustments for school, finance, and human services caseloads. So ours are structured the same as the director talked about, but this is more of a minimalist budget that's in those out years, and we've consistently done that. So I mean, this is not anything different looking forward. But yeah, the ending balance we do show as being the negative 426 in 2026. The director talked about most of the stuff that I would talk about, so I don't have to. So if there's any questions.
All right, thank you, JG. We do have a question. Representative Wolfmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. JG, I am a little bit confused with this because this shows every one of the Apex employees starting on day one. It's what this accounts for, the way I read it. There's no way that all those employees are going to count for on day one. So I don't know how I get a clear picture from this. And then if you're going to count them, at least you could count the individual income taxes they will pay. So this, it seems like a very skewed profile to me.
This does only look at the state expenditures. I mean, I will say that it didn't have any type of impact of any additional revenue coming in.
Right, but and that's one point. But then the point of front loading all the expenses for Apex is truly not an accurate picture of what's going to happen.
I would say that, I mean, I was just doing some quick comparisons. For 23, the impact that we had for Apex was about $25 million, and I believe the director had his about 98. So he had a larger impact in 23 than what we had originally shown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, any further questions for JG? Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm noticing a discrepancy between the director's budget and your budget on revenues for 2023. You've got $9,047,000, and he's got $9,197,000, which is $150 million different. Or I'm sorry, $197 million. it's $150 million different, but he said that he did not account for inflation in 2023. Would that be an inflationary factor?
No, I believe that the way that the director has theirs set up, they have taxes at that amount. The number I have would include some of the transfers and some of those other adjustments as well. So that's all lumped together. I haven't calculated it, but I'm assuming that if the director said that they were the same, they're pretty close.
Okay, thanks for clearing that up. Appreciate it.
Representative Helgerson.
You know, I'm always fascinated when I look through these. And one line item that never gets enough recognition is receipts above and below expenditures. And ideally, our expenditures and our revenues would match so that you don't have a deficit spending, but that we spend the same money that we have that we're taking in every year. Can you put a profile like that so we back into how much money we should have in order to keep a healthy revenue of 7.5% and then do it so that revenue and expenditures is zero and then we know how much money we have to spend each year? You could back into something like that, couldn't you? Yeah, I know you can.
Yeah, I'm sure we can. We'll just have to, I mean, we would need to know whether we want to reduce revenue or reduce expenditures if we're going to look at that zero growth.
Okay, thank you.
Any other further questions for JG? All right, seeing none, thank you, and thank you again for both of you to provide us with differing profiles. But actually, now that we're going to be moving into the budget discussions, we need to have those profiles administered to us so we can see exactly what the forecast is as far as the ending balance for the state of Kansas. All right, committee, we're going to go ahead and move on to budget discussions. So we're going to have possible action on House Bill 2588 and House Bill 2592, which are the appropriations bills that we have in this committee. So, Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, we've had some interesting discussion on two different profiles. They both really don't show that great of a picture in the out years. A lot of assumptions, and it's interesting how much money that both of these are sort of based on the governor's recommendations, and she spends almost the whole $2 billion. And so I think we need to really keep that in mind as we start the deliberation, as we go into working this budget, that I think we're going to have to make some changes. So with that, I would move that we move House Bill 2592 into House Bill 2588.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Second by Representative Sutton. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Representative Hoffman, you may close.
I close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion passes. House Bill 2592 is now inserted into House Bill 2588, which will be our overall budget bill. Before we move on to further discussion, I would like to reference you to the blue pages, which are the adjustments that were made by the Appropriations Committee in regards to those two budget bills, and I'll turn it over to Amy for a brief description.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would note the blue sheet replaces the pink sheets from yesterday. There were some items inadvertently omitted, so if you could just make the pink ones go away, we could pick those up. If you want to leave them on the counters, we'll pretend that never happened. The items on the blue sheet are a record of all of your actions so far, so all of the changes from the governor's recommendations on the budget so far. So any adjustments to the governor's recommendations have been recorded. So to the best of our knowledge, these now record everything that the committee has done. I would note the green sheet are all of the items that you wanted to address prior to the finalization of your budget. There are 2 additional sheets for today. You have another green sheet, which is information about the Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism on the cabins, and a salmon sheet on the Board of Tax Appeals and their full-time, their FTE positions and for IT. Also from yesterday, you had a tan sheet. These are your items that you had requested for omnibus consideration. And I know that's a lot of paper, so if you would need another copy, please let us know and we'll make sure you get one.
All right, thank you, Amy. Any questions for Amy? Representative Ballard.
No, Mr. Chairman, we're debating over here about the pink sheet and the tan, so
Oh, okay.
we don't have it. So that's why I was raising my hand. She said, if you need one, I'm sorry.
We can get you a copy. No, we don't need the pink one. Any questions for Amy? All right, see none. Thank you, Amy. And I'm sure that if the questions arise while we're going through the budget process, Amy will be readily available to answer any questions that we may have. All right, so the first item that I would like to discuss, and actually this is stemming from a discussion that I had with the Secretary of Administration in regards to, I think there was some discussion that we had in regards to the final amount that is needed for the docking renovation and also the KDHE lab. And I had a discussion with the Secretary that they're still awaiting those final numbers in regards to the docking and KDHE lab, namely looking at seeing how much of federal dollars can be utilized for the renovation of those projects. They will not have those finite numbers for a few weeks. She's guessing at the earliest 2 weeks. So actually, I would like to right now pull all of the money that has been set aside for docking and for KDHE lab for the purposes of getting the actual numbers from the Department of Administration and having that discussed at omnibus. So that's my motion. Is the second by Representative Sutton. Discussion on the motion? He was first, I'm sorry.
So I have a question.
Representative Wolfmore.
So you're pulling out not just the part that we might get from Spark, you're pulling out the whole thing?
We're pulling out the whole thing because we're going to be getting definitive numbers from the Department of Administration when they have some guidance on how much federal dollars can be used for both projects.
We were thinking already that we were going to spend half of that money from
Right.
SGF. So,
They're anticipating that could be more than half.
okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Williams.
Yes, Chairman, can you go ahead and repeat again, how much is that total? Or do we have a total that we put in?
The total amount should be 125 million because we approved, no, actually more than that. 92.5 million was approved by the State Finance Council, and that was half of the project. So another $92.5 million was going to be SGF for both projects, docking and the KDHE lab. And so that's pulling out both of those approved amounts and awaiting the final numbers from the Department of Administration, which they should have to us in a couple weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Representative Helgerson.
I understand that I'm going against the will of the legislature so far, but that 185 million that is part SGF and part ARPA funds, when I get into conversations with the administration, they say, well, those are ARPA funds that we're going to pull from. But nowhere ever is there a thorough discussion about that those ARPA funds could be used for other state purposes if the legislature changed its mind. And I think that that's helpful to know from the Department of Administration, a clear statement that says, if for some reason the legislature does not use those federal funds, those ARPA funds, for the two projects, or they use all of them for one project, the funds don't go away. It's just that we use the funds in a different source. And I think that's always helpful to know that.
And I would agree, and that's kind of why we need to wait and see exactly what the final numbers are going to be. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, I will move my motion. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, the next motion I'm going to make is going to be in regards to the Budget Stabilization Fund. As all of you are aware, I've been an advocate for putting money into the Budget Stabilization Fund for many years. But given some of the action that has either happened on the House floor or has happened in this committee, and also having the profiles that we went through this morning, I would like to make a reduction to the amount that's going to the Budget Stabilization Fund by $100 million that was approved by or submitted by the governor. So that would be a total transfer of $500 million into the Budget Stabilization Fund as opposed to the governor's recommendation of $600 million. The reason why I'm making this motion is an offset. There are a lot of things that have been happening in regards to either one-time spending or continual spending year from year, and I think we just need to reduce that transfer by $100 million. So that would be my motion. Seconded by Representative Hoffman. Discussion on the motion. Representative Helgerson.
Well, I share your concern, but if you leave the money in the Budget Stabilization Fund, it gives legislators less of an opportunity to use it for spending or for tax reductions. And if it's floating out there, then there's more of an opportunity for individuals such as myself to come up with some novel way of using it. And I appreciate your position. I'm just trying to look at the more, I'll say, conservative, restrained way, and you have much more sophistication in this than I do. So could you explain a little bit more?
Well, and I can explain it more. And actually, I would make the assumption that during all the analytics with the governor's budget, the $600 million was to hit, and looking at all the other aspects of her budget, the $600 million was to hit that 7.5% ending balance. As I said before, I'm a huge advocate for the Budget Stabilization Fund. I want to keep the language in there that says if we are above the April CRE numbers, then a portion of that still goes into the Budget Stabilization Fund. Because I think we need to have that apparatus as far as putting money away, because we know a recession is coming. Whether that be 2, 3, 4 years from now, it's coming. I just, after looking at everything that has been passed in our chamber, now granted the Senate still has to confer with that, or things that have happened in this committee, we're spending above the governor's recommendation. So we need to make a reduction somewhere. I still think $500 million in the stabilization fund positions ourselves financially stable. So reduce it by $100 million, keep the language in there that we have the apparatus of having money going into there after the April CRE numbers. So hopefully we exceed those expectations and additional money is going into the Budget Stabilization Fund. But due to actions that have occurred, I think it is only prudent for us to look at a reduction from the governor's recommendation of $600 million to $500 million. Representative Wolfmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to agree today with my friend from Wichita. I mean, of all years that we have money available, of all years that we should be meeting this 7.5%, it seems like this is the year to do it. And if we don't do it and we have money, I don't know when we're going to do it. So thank you very much.
Representative Estes.
I'm a little bit hesitant, but I think what would make me feel more comfortable is if we could get based on what we end up with today, a list of the 24/7, basically what I asked Adam for, for the director for, I probably asked the wrong person for that. A list of all of our new expenditures noted with their funding source and whether it's a one-time expenditure, but exclude the one-time federal money, and a list of our full-time employees that we've added this year, so that we could come back and take a look at that at Omnibus. So I'm going to vote yes, and put that in and make that a request of legislative research. And then maybe if we do some cutting, or maybe we'll revisit that.
Well, I think everybody knows that nothing is ever really dead in this committee until actually sine die. So we can definitely get that information. We can have the conversation in regards to Omnibus, because as all of you may or may not know, we actually have scheduled our Omnibus meeting for April 21st and April 22nd. And that'll be after the April CREs, consensus revenue estimate numbers, come out. So that meeting is scheduled for the 21st and the 22nd. And so we'll be having a discussion in regards to all the omnibus items and GBAs or whatever the case may be.
Happy birthday to me.
Happy birthday. All right. Any further discussion? Representative Owens.
Well, I was just thinking about this and wondering if, it seems like to me, literally over the next day or two, we're going to see swings of 10, 20, 50, $100 million as we discuss all of these items, what stays, what goes. It almost seems like to me that this motion should be discussed after we have further discussion instead of before, so we know what's going to stick and what's not going to stick. I'm trying to understand where the $100 million comes from specifically, I suppose. Is there specific items in here or specific changes that are expected to affect that? Or is it just based on, we assume we're going to need it and so we're going to pull it out?
I would probably say it's the latter. There's an assumption, obviously, of things that have happened in this committee where we have increased spending beyond the governor's budget recommendation. And I don't want to point anybody out, but I have to say the social services budget is one of those that I think we need to make some adjustments. And if this motion passes and we want to revisit it when we have the entire budget discussion, we can definitely revisit it and see where the numbers are at. But I just say, with everything that has occurred in committee and also with items that have passed on the House floor, adjustments are going to be made so we definitely have a positive ending balance.
Right. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just having listened to JG talk about the consensus revenue estimates, and if you look at what we were presented with from 2020 to 2025, that's an increase of 10% in revenue, but an increase in 22% in expenditures. We can't keep doing that. That doesn't even make sense. And I know that's to prepare us. It's not a prediction, but still that should concern all of us. And I was thinking about how much we have spent in here. I don't know what that total is above the governor's recommendation, but I do. Okay, 52.5 million. Well, that's not as much as I thought. Anyway, so we've got to do something. So thank you.
Any further discussion? Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I can support your motion, but I also echo the sentiments from my friend from Heston. We just saw a very rosy outlook from the director of the budget that shows the governor blowing through $2 billion in 4 years. That's without adding some of the things that we did and without having inflation added to expenses. So we're already my guess is we're gonna have $0 for this budget stabilization fund by the end of this thing. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I move my motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Okay. Any further discussion? Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me help out the Budget Stabilization Fund just a little bit here. I'd like to delete from the Department of Administration $460 million for the governor's election purchase program. If we're going to rebate tax dollars, then let's do it in the form of reducing our tax rates rather than just willy-nilly handing out money at a flat rate across the board, which makes no sense to me whatsoever. I was dying to do this in committee. I was dying to do it on the report out, but by golly, I can do it now. That's my motion.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Second by Representative Helgerson. Discussion on the motion. Representative Wolfmore.
I just want to make sure I'm following. So is that's the $250 each person would get and $500 for a married couple that would
That
get?
is correct.
You're deleting that?
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Representative Ballard.
That was my question. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr.
All right. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Representative Sutton, you may close.
I gladly close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Further discussion. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that we remove $332.2 million from the governor's budget that deals with paying off bonds. I think it's 2015A and 2015G.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Second by Representative Francis. Discussion on the motion. Representative Ballard.
Clarification, please. That's a whole lot of money.
Representative Hoffman.
Yeah, it is. So the governor put in 332 to pay off these two bonds, and then put in like was 200 and some million to pay the Capers layering payment. But we have basically put another 750 million into Capers, and so it is my feeling that that was a better payoff than paying off these two bonds, which can be redone at a lower rate. So there is a bill out there to pay these bills or these bonds off. So I think at this time it just needs to be removed from the budget.
Okay.
Representative Ballard.
I thank you for the explanation. I wasn't being funny. We were laughing over here. I just wanted to know what it was. Thank you.
And the bill that he's referencing to is Senate Bill 443. And actually on Thursday, we're scheduled to have a hearing on that because the Senate had removed paying off all the bonds and put it into the form of a bill. So they don't have it in the budget that they just passed. Well, I think they're going to pass out today, but they had the discussion on yesterday. And so we potentially, subject to change, have a hearing on Senate Bill 443, and that has these bonds in there.
And the amount, please, again, 333 million?
332.5 million, is
Okay.
that correct? 332.2 million. Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to look at the rationalization for this a little bit. I'm a big fan of paying off debt. That's something that's going to get me excited in almost any situation. How does this affect? Is this the one that adds up to about $80 million in payments per year with those two bonds? If I'm doing this from memory, so.
Representative Hoffman.
I'm not sure. I can't remember if that's the one. Probably is. It could be.
There was a 50 and a 30, basically.
Yeah, I don't know that it's that much. I think maybe you may be thinking of, oh, it is that much. Amy's nodding yes. So yeah.
Okay, so that affects our cash flow by $80 million increased per year, increased expenditure, that is.
Right.
We discussed previously looking at all bonds in a more of a global perspective. Is that what the Senate bill does? Well,
No, it is, if I may.
whoever
No,
whoever has
it
the
just
answer.
lists, I think it's 3 or 4 bonds in that particular, not all the bonds that we
Okay.
have outstanding. And if you recall, we did have a discussion in regards to the bonds, but some of those are not callable yet. And so we can't pay them off.
Right.
And so there's only a select few that actually we could look at and address paying off right now. And I think that's what the governor had in her budget. That's also the bonds that are in Senate Bill 443.
Okay. So we'll get another opportunity at this, is what you're saying?
Oh, yeah, yes.
Yeah, this is just bonds 2015A and 2015G. It's various, I mean, because over the years, they've, added bonds together. So it's this building and the biodefense.
Right.
MBAth over at Manhattan. I think it also is John Redmond Reservoir.
Okay, those
there's,
are the
There's
two I
a
was
bunch of
thinking
different
of.
ones that have been put into this, but they're the only ones that are close to being callable, and so it's just those two.
All
And
right.
like the chairman said, there's a bill that we're going to be seeing to work through this, but there's also the rationale that the governor did not pay that extra $750 million to Capers, which is also a big, huge.
And is it a higher interest rate?
And it's a higher interest rate. So that it's kind of a little bit of a, which one is the better one to pay off? And to me, if we're going to pay off, it's the Capers, the ones that better pay off.
And I would concur that paying the higher interest rate is a better program, even though that's not exactly a bond, but it kind of works the same way. All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Helgerson. You're fine. Representative Owens.
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you for that clarification. So it seems like, what was the amount of these bonds again? 350?
332.2.
332. So is in essence, kind of the justification for this, because I'm with Representative Sutton and very much agree with the idea of paying down debt. In essence, these are the changes we're making to account for the $1 billion in Capers. I mean, is that kind of what I'm getting at here? Because I'm adding up all these numbers we're pulling out, and we're getting close to $1 billion.
Sort of.
Okay.
Yeah, sort of, but there's also the bill to do this.
Sure, no,
And so
I understand, and I look forward to that conversation as well. I'm just trying to justify, because the last thing I want to do is take money away from paying down debt to then spend it somewhere else that's
Right.
not accomplishing the same thing.
This is part of the offset for the 750 for the
Okay.
Capers.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Helgerson.
And I understand that I'm like you, and I don't have the confidence. We pay down, if we don't take this money, the Senate Conference Committee or some other group is going to take it. I'd rather pay down the debt, and that's why I'm not going to support it. Worst case scenario, I pay more debt down. God.
Representative Wolfmore.
I also won't support this motion. The money we invest in Capers is 100% SGF, and we only have a savings of 85% SGF. I think these bonds are a good idea. I'd take the $80 million savings. And I'm not sure what the intention is. If we're taking it out today, I assume that means that you're probably not supporting the bill to pay off these bonds. Okay, well, I stand in opposition. Thank you.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the points made, and it is a valid one that we do get some help on the federal salaries for Capers. So the way I considered the priority between that, and there's not one way, is if we owe 7 3/4 as the current rate, and that rate may be decreased by Capers, but 85% of a 7 3/4 rate is still over 6.5. If I can get debt under that 6.5, I would rather hold that debt than the Capers debt. So for that reason, I'd still consider the Capers to be one of our higher cost debts, and would seek ways where we could decrease that until such time as our interest cost on other debt would exceed that rate. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion on the motion? Representative Estes.
I have a question for the maker of the motion. So you're saying you want to refinance it rather than pay it off, refinancing at a lower interest rate. Do you have a number of how much money we save by that?
Representative Hoffman?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the refinance rate would be. I'm simply saying that there's a bill out there that will do this, that will pay these bonds off, that we are yet to hear. So at this point, I just want to take it out of the budget. And part of my reason too is because we've already spent $750 million more than what the governor had said due to the paying off the capers.
Which I appreciate all the sides of this discussion, because we want to lower the cost of government so that if we hit hard times, that's the benefit to paying off our debt. But we do need an offset, so,
Representative Johnson?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. And well, I know that this would take it off the table at this point in time. How things continue to play out going forward is another question. We would be escrowing these dollars for some period of time until that call date hits, and I think we would have a chance to look at again paying it off if our numbers continue to be positive. So the question is, do we pay one now that we pay, continue to look at what we can pay in the future? And that would be my choice to take that step now that we can take, rather than putting the money in escrow towards that bond. But either is an effective way to reduce debt long term. Thank you.
Any further discussion in regards to the motion? Representative Alcala?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, so I'm a little confused because I heard somebody say refinance, but I thought your motion was just to leave it like it is. Okay. All right.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Representative Hoffman, you may close.
I close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No?
The ayes appear to have it. Division has been called. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign.
Been assaulted now.
All right, the motion passes on a vote from 14 to 7. So we're back on the budget bill. Further discussion. You have one? Job creation. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would, earlier on, we put $37 million into the Job Creation Fund, which the normal is, I think, 7.5 to or 8.5 million. We also, by doing that, we also increased that every year to be that same amount. So we increased the every year it would be 37 million. So I would like to make a motion that we decrease that to 15 million instead of the 37 million.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Second by Representative Francis. Discussion on the motion.
What is it?
Department of Commerce.
Okay.
Representative Carlin.
Sorry, I was still reeling from not paying off the MBEF bonds, and could you please tell me the beginning of your motion? I don't know what this is from.
The Job Creation Fund in the Department of Commerce is, we usually have a transfer of, is it 8 million? Yeah, it's around 8 million, I think. And in the governor's budget, the transfer went to 37 million. We approved that earlier, but that was not a one-time increase of 37 million. That was a continual increase of 37 million every year. My motion would change it to a $15 million transfer every year starting this year, or starting 2023.
In the job creation,
In the Job Creation Fund.
because we don't need to create more jobs. I don't know. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hoffman.
Oh,
I'm not sure how many jobs
Now, that's pretty
that
good.
government
I gotta give it
creates, but I think there's a misnomer there a little bit. But
I had to give it that one.
I think 15 million is plenty in the Job Creation Fund.
Representative Williams.
Yeah, just a quick question on that. Is that the fund, is there a balance in the fund? Do they cycle through it every year?
Representative Hoffman?
Very good question. There is a balance in that fund, and I've heard it's anywhere from 12 million to 60 million. It just depends on how you want to figure, because what the secretary does is makes an offer to a company. So they've got offers on the table for so much money that have not been, accepted. And so they're figuring that's out of that fund. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, so that's kind of.
It's really hard to exactly know, but if this 37 million was put in, I would estimate that there'd be about 60 million into that fund.
Okay, so it's kind of the governor's slush fund to help attract a business above HPIP or any of the other types of tools that we have?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Carlin?
I have no idea, can't find my commerce budget in here, but would this be money then that might go to the Apex formula for other companies that might, not the one we're bidding on, but for future use of, if we've got a new tool for economic development, is that what that is for then, to fund that source of spending?
Representative Hoffman?
This job creation fund has been there for quite a while, so yeah, the secretary can use it to make offers to companies to entice them to come in. And I guarantee you that even if we put this to 15 million, I guarantee you that we will probably hear in the Legislative Budget Committee over the summer, the secretary will come in and he can always ask us for more in the Legislative Budget Committee if he has a valid reason for needing that money.
Representative Sutton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, I'm oddly comfortable with this due to the fact that we just put together one heck of a toolbox for commerce. I think that toolbox is what was needed. In the past, that job creation fund was just, it was there and they kind of used it, but it wasn't the whole list of tools that we ended up passing. So with the passage of the Apex bill, I feel a lot more comfortable about reducing the spend on the job creation fund. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hoffman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And actually, this still increases the job creation fund. So.
Any further discussion on the motion? All right, seeing none, Representative Hoffman, you may close.
I close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. There's one other item I'd like to discuss, and then we're probably going to recess until tomorrow morning. But if you recall, when we had the governor's budget that came through committee, and we were talking about the grant office, and I had mentioned grant. And I had mentioned at that point that I had received information and a request from the Kansas Holocaust Commemoration. I don't know if you guys recall that. And I had mentioned at that time that when we put the budget together that we would like to dedicate some funds to the grant office because that Holocaust Commemoration actually takes place here in the Capitol, and actually this year it's scheduled on April 28th. It's not a lot of money, and I'm sure I'm going to have an individual that's might question the amount, but it's minimal. To be $10,000 that they're asking for to, they've never received money from the state, but they, like I said, they perform this commemoration here in the Capitol. And I already got a second by Representative Helgerson in my motion. So it'd be either having that $10,000 from existing funds with the grant office, and if that's not available, we have $15 million that's not going to be utilized because we're not sweeping the remaining $15 million from EDIF to the State General Fund. moving forward, so that money is staying in EDIF, and if they can't find money within the grant office, then it'd be 10,000 from EDIF. So is that still fine with the second? Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I move my motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes. All right, committee, we do have 10 minutes before session, so some of the items may be lengthy discussion. We are scheduled to have a continuation on the budget tomorrow, so we're just going to go ahead and hold off discussion. If there's any questions about that, first, Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll wait for my cleanup provisos and stuff until tomorrow, but I did want to respond to some comments from the previous representative. Bring your attention to page 2, the bottom. There's 68.5 million on there. That was the money that the governor had put in there for the profit, the savings off of Medicaid expansion, which we took out, so we added that back in. So just for clarification, instead of the 78 million over here on page 3, it's 10 million for KDHE if you take out the 68 million that we had to back in. So I'm not sure how you do that, but anyway, and then if the next page, page 4, 68 million is correct for Department of Children and Families, and then, or no, for KDADS, and then the next one is Department of Children and Families. So instead of the 200 million that was mentioned, it's about 84 million. So let's just be clear on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Representative Helgerson.
Could we please have staff give us a summary of where we're at and after our actions this morning?
Yeah, we have that updated for tomorrow morning when we resume discussion on the budget. Representative Wolfmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Carpenter, I didn't follow that 80, what's 84 million? I'm not sure what you were referring to.
That's the total of the spend.
Oh,
Just to make sure, it's a little bit off of 200 million, but it's a lot of money still.
okay. Thank you very much.
Representative Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we do a bill introduction before we hit the floor? I have bill introduction.
Okay, let's see if there's any discussion on the budget. Okay, we're going to resume discussion on House Bill 2588 tomorrow. Now we'll go to the earlier item on the agenda, bill introductions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a RS number 3430. It's authorizing the establishment of city or county child death review boards. Been asked to introduce this morning.
All right, you heard the
Thank
bill
you.
introduction, seconded by Representative Helgerson. All those in favor of the bill introduction say aye. Aye. Opposed? Bill is introduced. Any further discussion for this morning's meeting? All right, seeing none, we are going to adjourn until 9 a.m.